The movie opens up on the streets of Los Angeles as two men discuss a secret mission inside a car. One of these men is Nick Hopewell, a British Secret Service agent, and a hitman who kills people for money. The other man hands him a package containing a photo of his next target. It is revealed that this is going to be Nick's last mission, after which he plans to retire. The hitman opens the package and sees the photo of a young woman getting out of a car. Apparently, this woman, Laurel Stevenson, has been having an extramarital affair with a mysterious man. She is flying to Boston later that day to meet that man for the first time. Nick's mission is to kill her in front of her lover. Despite being hesitant about this whole affair, he agrees to complete this job. Nick will also be taking a flight to Boston later that day. That evening, Craig Tumi, an investment banker working for a large company, arrives at the Los Angeles airport. He is headed to Boston for a meeting with the board of directors of the company. He is about to check in when his secretary suddenly stops him. Tumi is informed that the bonds he personally invested in, on behalf of the clients, have all gone down the drain. As it stands, he has made a loss of whopping $43 million. The secretary begs him not to go to Boston as the board of directors will crucify him. Tumi, however, seems unreasonably calm and tells his secretary that he will face them. Nearby, a blind girl named Dinah Bellman senses something strange as Tumi passes by her. Dinah also happens to be traveling to Boston with her aunt for an eyesight restoration surgery. She cannot fully comprehend it yet, but the blind girl has strange psychic powers. All these people are traveling to Boston in the same flight, the American Pride Airlines 858. In a stroke of coincidence, Nick bumps into Laurel right before they both board the plane. He recognizes her, but the latter has no idea who he is. Elsewhere, Captain Brian Engel, a commercial pilot with American Pride Airlines, has just landed at the Los Angeles airport. He is doing a routine checkup of his equipment when a security personnel arrives in the cockpit. Captain Brian is quickly taken off his plane and is given horrible news. His ex-wife, whom he divorced only a few months ago, has sadly passed away in a motor accident. Brian is left shaken by this sudden information and can barely hold himself together. American Pride have booked him a ticket to fly straight back to his home in Boston. Soon enough, Captain Brian is escorted into Airlines 858. On board the same plane are Dinah, Tumi, Laurel, and Nick. The plane departs for Boston, and all of them settle down for a nap midway into the flight. The scene shifts to a few hours later as Dinah wakes up from her nap. It is 2:40 a.m., and the blind girl asks her aunt for a glass of water. She is slightly alarmed when she reaches out to the adjacent seat only to find it empty. Dinah then presses the button to call for a stewardess, but nobody answers. Now panicking, she gets up from her seat and starts calling out for help. Nobody answers her pleas, so the blind girl starts feeling her way around the plane's aisle. A horrible thought comes to her mind that the plane had landed while she was asleep, and everyone had already left. The truth is, the plane is still flying and nobody even left their seats. In an unexplained event, most of the people present in the flight have disappeared into thin air. Meanwhile, Dinah starts hopelessly reaching out to every seat near her so that someone could help her. Soon, she accidentally comes across a wig which is lying on one of the seats, and gets genuinely startled. The poor girl screams in fear, which wakes up Captain Brian, who is still in his deep nap. He hurries towards Dinah and comforts her. The captain asks her to relax, but the poor girl begins blabbering in fear. She yells that everyone is gone and begs him to find her aunt. It is then that Brian looks around and finds almost every seat empty. Frightened, Dinah begins loudly calling out for her aunt. This wakes up two other passengers in the same cabin, Don Gaffney, a military aircraft tool and die worker, and Albert Costner, a violinist. Seconds later, 6 other passengers also arrive in the cabin. However, everyone seems clueless as to what has happened. Following this, Brian, as a professional pilot, decides to go check the cockpit. Laurel then asks the rest if the plane had stopped somewhere earlier. Don replies that he has no idea as he was sleeping the whole time. Seconds later, Dinah approaches Laurel and inquires if she is a teacher. The latter does in fact teach primary students and asks how Dinah knew about it. The blind girl replies she deduced that by the way Laurel articulates. It is obvious that Dinah has a very keen sense of hearing. After a while, Nick decides to join Brian towards the front of the plane. He finds the captain cluelessly knocking on the cockpit's door. The two introduce each other, but Nick is elusive about what he does for a living. He then suggests that the flight crew may have also vanished like so many other passengers in the plane. It is pretty clear that Nick has analyzed the whole situation much better than anyone else. Back in the passenger cabin, fiction writer Bob Jenkins and violinist Albert stroll around different classes. Bob seems to have a strong ability for deduction, using which he tries to piece together the situation. However, he is left completely baffled when they find clothes, jewelry, personal belongings, and even things like dental bridges lying on the seats. It is almost as if all the passengers were yanked away from the plane and all their artificial belongings were left behind. In the meantime, investment banker Tumi starts to get extremely irritated. He confronts Brian and Nick, demanding to know what is happening. The latter doesn't mince his words and points out there is nobody inside the cockpit currently. They have to break into it, after which Brian can hopefully take control of the plane. However, Tumi begins yelling out that he has a very important meeting in Boston. He gets so heated that Nick is forced to grab his nose in some kind of a chokehold to get him to calm down. Nick only lets go after repeatedly threatening Tumi to be seated silently without uttering a word. Following this, Nick and Brian return to the front of the plane. They manage to forcefully open the cockpit door only to find it completely empty. The plane is flying on autopilot while the cruise watches, and clothes are laying around. Just then, Bob and Albert also arrive in the cockpit and reveal that the entire plane is empty. Nick suspects that the plane may have stopped briefly earlier, which allowed other passengers to get down. But Brian points out that it is impossible, as the pilots have also vanished. Without them, it would be impossible to get the plane back up in the air. Thus, Brian assumes control of the plane and immediately gets to work. He tries to establish a radio connection with the nearest airport only to receive no reply. Brian keeps trying to reach out to several airports, including smaller ones nearby. Yet, nobody even acknowledges their call for help. Even Strategic Air Command, which should be on air at all times, seems to be out of contact. The captain then asks Albert to go back and have a look outside the plane. In his estimate, they are barely 50 miles away from Denver. However, Albert comes back with even more bizarre news. There is nothing outside, no city lights, just plain darkness. The passengers finally begin to question if a nuclear war broke out while they were asleep. Nonetheless, the plane seems to be completely fine. It hasn't veered off of its course, and there's plenty of fuel for the time being. So, the others leave Brian and Nick alone in the cockpit and return back to the cabin. Now that everyone has seated, the passengers subsequently introduce themselves. Laurel also has a heart-to-heart conversation with Dinah. Several months ago, she saw a singles ad in a newspaper. She then contacted the given number and started regularly communicating with the man who published the ad. Despite being embarrassed at how naive it sounds, she reveals that she was headed to Boston just to meet him for the first time. On the other hand, Don was going to meet his newborn granddaughter, while Albert was on his way to music school in Boston. There is also Bethany Sims, a rebellious teenager who was headed to her aunt's house in Massachusetts. Bethany's mother sent her away after she found the teenager smoking. Tagging along with the group is Ruddy Warwick, a businessman who seems to have an insatiable hunger. However, Tumi refuses to introduce himself as he is still angry about the earlier incident. Back in the cockpit, Brian is still trying to establish communication with any control center on the ground. He gets increasingly frustrated when nobody answers his calls. The radar also shows that there are currently no other planes in the sky for hundreds of miles. Brian then ominously announces that they are utterly alone in the sky and nobody will come to help them. Nick, who is seated in the co-pilot's chair, asks the captain to compose himself. After all, the plane is under his control now and all the passengers depend on him. The two men then discuss what they should do next. Nick suggests staying on course and landing the plane on Logan International Airport in Boston. But they have no idea what's currently going on the ground. Landing the plane on a busy airport like Logan will be practically impossible without any communication with the control center. Thus, their safest bet will be to head to a smaller airport where the traffic will be lighter. Following this, Brian takes the plane out of autopilot mode and makes an announcement for the other passengers. He tells them that he has been unable to establish any ground communication. They should have seen lights coming from the city of Denver about 5 minutes ago, but everything appears to be dark and empty, with no other option left at the moment. He announces that they are now headed towards Bangor Airport in Maine. While everyone understands the decision in the context of this strange situation, Tumi remains stubborn. He suddenly stands up and starts yelling towards the cockpit. There is a strange craziness in his eyes, as if there is something wrong going inside his head. He aggressively protests and announces that it is crucial for him to attend a business trip in Boston. Even when Laurel tells him that he is scaring the little girl, Tumi continues to shout. The other passengers then threaten to beat him if he doesn't calm down quickly. Suddenly, Dinah's psychic abilities start to manifest, and she gets a strange vision. She unknowingly starts a mental connection with Tumi and gets a glimpse of the world through his eyes. To her utter horror, all the passengers appear like weird, slimy monsters to him. There is clearly something wrong with his mental state. Tumi then grabs his head and lets out a scream. Fortunately, he soon calms down and backs down from his aggressive mode. In the aftermath of this standoff, Tumi grabs the newspapers that are available in the plane. He begins slowly tearing the pages, making a slow, screeching sound. Dawn tells him to calm down and sits nearby him. Meanwhile, Dinah shares what she saw with Laurel, but the latter dismisses the matter. She even tells the little girl to take a nap to ease her mind. However, Dinah says that the last time she woke up from a nap, most of the passengers were gone. The fiction writer, Bob, who is seated nearby, hears this. It is rather strange that he also had woken up from a nap when he found the plane empty. So, he goes to Albert and asks what he was doing before this strange event happened. Albert replies that he was actually sleeping and only woke up when he heard the little girl scream. This seemingly confirms that all the passengers currently present in this plane were actually sleeping when everyone else vanished. Sometime later, Bob and Albert discuss possible theories about what might have happened. The writer suggests that this can be a part of a covert military experiment. Maybe some kind of a sleeping gas was leaked into the plane that knocked them out. Then, everyone else was escorted out, leaving behind a group of 9 passengers for the test. This also explains why there was conveniently a pilot on board. It is possible that Captain Brian, who is currently flying the plane, is a secret government agent. However, Albert points out the obvious flaw in this theory. They have not seen the lights from any city ever since they woke up. It is not possible that the military switched off the power supply to several major cities just for this test. Elsewhere in the cockpit, Brian and Nick begin discussing their own explanations about this strange situation. Nick thinks they might have slipped into some sort of another dimension like a fiction story. This would mean that they have no idea how the world down below has changed. After all, they have been flying above a cover of clouds for the past half an hour. Brian says it would be too dangerous to take the plane below these clouds. He cannot take risk flying too close to unknown terrain. The scene shifts to a few hours later as the sun finally rises. Bethany looks out of the window, but the view remains unchanged. They have now been flying over a thick cover of clouds for several hours. Just then, Captain Brian makes an announcement that they are now 30 miles off the coast of Maine. His deck equipment shows that their path is clear, meaning that they will now begin their initial descent into Bangor Airport. The captain sounds calm and requests everyone to put on their seatbelts. In the cockpit, however, the mood is completely different. Brian sounds composed on the outside, but he knows that things might go bad from here on. He is on the edge as he descends the plane right into the thick cover of clouds. Right on cue, the plane is jolted by heavy turbulence. Several of the passengers have a collective bad feeling about descending downwards. Bethany cannot take the stress and moves away from the window seat. She is soon joined by Albert, who tries to calm her down. On the other hand, Tumi, seated towards the back of the cabin, is zoned out of his mind. He is still tearing the newspaper shred by shred, irritating Dawn, who is near him. The trolleys carrying refreshments as well as luggages begin falling down due to the turbulence. As the plane continues to tilt downwards, Bethany passes out on Albert's lap. In the meantime, the usually calm Nick also loses his composure. He begs Brian to pull the plane back up again, but the captain explains that their fuel is running out and they cannot afford to keep flying. He continues to veer the plane downwards, and eventually his risk pays out. They are now not just underneath the cloud cover, but also in perfect position to land. After a while, the American Pride 858 lands at Bangor International Airport in Maine. They deploy the emergency exit and disembark from the plane. Right off the bat, the passengers feel that there is something wrong with this place. They head towards the airport's building only to find it completely deserted. The restaurants are empty, there is no electricity, even cars and battery-powered devices are useless. Similarly, Dinah confesses that she hears an eerie crunching cereal-like sound in the distance. She feels like it is coming closer and demands that they must leave before it reaches them. The adults, however, try to calm her down and decide to have a look around for a while. While everyone else is distracted, Tumi sneaks away from the group. This eerie place has triggered all the trauma in his mind. It is revealed that he was abused as a child by his overbearing and sadistic father. When Tumi failed to get straight A's at school, his father warned him about the Langoliers. According to the old man, these were horrific creatures that chased down lazy people and devoured them. Tumi is desperate to reach his meeting with the board of directors in Boston. He plans to announce that he knowingly lost their money and quit his job on the spot. The poor man hopes that this step will finally free him from all the trauma that his father gave him. With every passing second in this strange place, he slowly starts to lose his sense of reality. Elsewhere, the others find a restaurant and decide to stop for food. They soon discover that food and drinks have no flavor whatsoever. The matches laying around also do not light, and even sound doesn't reverberate in this place. Moments later, Tumi arrives at the restaurant with a gun that he stole from the airport's security room. He takes Bethany hostage while demanding that they fly to Boston as soon as possible. This tense situation is made even worse when Bethany bites Tumi's hand and tries to run away. The crazed banker is about to shoot Bethany when suddenly Albert jumps right in front of her. To everyone's surprise, the bullet has no force and it harmlessly bounces off Albert's chest. Nonetheless, Tumi is captured and Nick ties him down with a nearby rope. Following this chaos, the passengers sit down to discuss what's happening. Bob, who has been thinking deeply for the past several hours, has an outrageous theory. Turns out, the day they flew from Los Angeles, there was an unusual aurora borealis in the area. They must have flown right through a rip in the space-time continuum, traveling about 15 minutes into the past. Everything with energy has moved on without them, which is why this place is empty. This also means that jet fuel would be useless, as there would be no energy to create a spark. In a stroke of genius, Albert suddenly realizes something important. The plane has electricity and life, pointing out to the fact that it contains its own pocket of the present time. Therefore, anything loaded into the plane would subsequently regain its energy, even jet fuel. Unfortunately, the crunching cereal-like sound that Dinah warned about earlier is now closer to them. The other passengers can also hear it loud and clear. Next, the passengers break into two groups as Nick, Brian, Albert, and Bob head back to the plane. They take a matchbox from the airport's restaurant with them to test out their theory. To their surprise, Nick is absolutely right. The plane does support life as the match ignites inside its atmosphere. Back in the restaurant, Tumi has a conversation with Dinah about the Langoliers. The blind girl listens to the description carefully and is empathetic towards the crazy banker. Several minutes pass by and Tumi pretends to fall asleep. The others leave him unguarded, so he uses this opportunity to escape from his trap and sneak behind the restaurant's counter. He has now completely lost his mind and sees everyone else as Langoliers. In a shocking twist, he stabs Dinah in the chest with a kitchen knife and runs towards the security room downstairs. Albert and Don give chase while Bethany rushes towards the plane to call for help. Soon afterwards, Nick returns to the restaurant only to see the blind girl laying down on the floor. She is still alive but is bleeding internally. An emotionally distraught Laurel tells him about everything that happened in his absence. Incensed, Nick plans to kill Tumi, but Dinah insists that he must stay alive. She believes that the crazy banker will have a crucial role in getting them out of this place. Downstairs, Tumi springs a surprise attack on Don and kills him using a sharp rod. Albert, however, manages to subdue the crazy banker by knocking him unconscious. He then heads upwards to relay this information to the others. Next, Nick rallies the remaining survivors to return to the plane, leaving Tumi behind in the airport. They place Dinah safely inside the passenger's cabin and begin the process of refueling the plane. In a shocking twist of events, Dinah telepath communicates with Tumi. He is badly injured and has already lost any sense of reality. She uses this situation and convinces him that the board of directors have arrived outside to meet him. Delirious, Tumi slowly but surely crawls his way to the tarmac. Once outside, the crazy banker hallucinates that the board of directors are actually there. He runs towards them and gleefully confesses to losing millions of dollars on purpose. He is overjoyed until his boss transforms into his father, who immediately chastises Tumi. On the other hand, the plane completes its refueling just as the nearby forest begins to shake violently. Tumi also regains awareness and sees the Langoliers approaching. He screams loudly and runs, drawing these monstrous creatures away from the plane. Eventually, the crazy banker is killed by the Langoliers and the plane narrowly escapes. Unfortunately, Dinah soon dies of her injuries after telling Laurel that she had no regrets. The blind girl was able to use Tumi's eyes to see one last time before passing away. Nonetheless, the plane flies towards the time rip once again. Bob suddenly realizes that only those on board who were awake disappeared when first entering the rip. This means that if they enter the rip awake, they will all perish. He conveys this message to Brian, who turns the plane away at last second. They eventually find out that the only way to safely enter the rip is to reduce the cabin pressure to make all the passengers lose consciousness. But one person has to sacrifice themselves to turn the pressure up just before entering the rip. Nick volunteers for this, much to Laurel's dismay. He shares a passionate kiss with her before proceeding with the plan. Then, Brian reduces the cabin pressure, and all the passengers lose consciousness. Nick, meanwhile, breathes through an oxygen mask and turns the pressure up before entering the rip. Just as expected, he vanishes after the plane makes it back to their original timeline. Shortly afterwards, the passengers awake and Brian lands the plane at Los Angeles Airport. At first, it appears to be dead and lifeless, just like Bangor. But they soon hear a noise, not like the eerie, crunching noise from Bangor, but a gentle, soothing hum. They also find that air has scent, food has flavor, and sound reverberates. Bob deduces that they have returned several minutes into the future, and that the present is moments away from catching up to them. He has everyone line up against a wall to avoid the impending flow of traffic. Seconds later, a vibrant flash of colors shines while the present timeline catches up to them, and many people appear as the timeline returns to its normal state. Overjoyed, the group runs outside together and jumps for joy in a freeze-frame shot.